I'm not sure this music corresponds to the state of Nuggets right now, but what the hell. Hello, everybody, and welcome to episode 114 of the longest tenured Denver Nuggets spin-off podcast in the world. Welcome to the DNVR Nuggets' Serbian Corner. My name is Miroslav, and before we begin, please let me remind you to like the video on YouTube, and if you haven't already, subscribe to the DNVR Sports YouTube channel and DNVR Nuggets podcast channel. The audio version is perfect for your commute or to make your office/home office time more bearable. If you want to support the show more directly, you can become a Patreon supporter at patreon.com/MiroslavCuk, just like my Seco tier supporters, Peter Plummer and Daniel Lynch. The NBA season is here. Our Denver Nuggets started their season in Ball Arena versus the Hunters of Thunder. This is what I'm going to call them this season. It looked like it might be a fun game for about 6 minutes of the first quarter, but then the Nuggets started looking a tad slower and less interested in this game than the biggest favorite in the West this season. Coach Michael Malone went to the well-known substitution pattern that was so good the last couple of seasons, subbing out Jamal for Westbrook at the 7-minute mark in the first, and then bringing him back to play next to Russ. Also, having Murray staggering with the 4 real guys off the bench meant playing really small against a very athletic opponent. Not great, Bob. Then in the second half, we saw minutes with Jokic playing together with Russ, Payton, and Gordon, and that kind of spacing hurt my soul. Christian Braun was good in his debut with the starting lineup, but I must mention the spacing is significantly worse compared to last season's with the starters. Not Christian's fault, of course, it's just the geometry of the court. Russ had great energy on both ends of the court, but it was no coincidence he ended up taking 6 3-pointers in 21 minutes of game time, which would be more than 10 attempts per 36 minutes, something Michael Porter should be taking, not Russ. The Nuggets got mega mandered at home, 89-104. And, Nikola Jokic got a triple-double, whatever. A day and a half later, the Clippers came to town. This time, the Nuggets looked even worse in the first half. Zubac was his usual great versus Jokic. Norman Powell was amazing. What a surprise. And James Jimmy Harden was foul baiting like it was 2018. It was minus 18 late in the second quarter when Denver threw a haymaker. They cut the deficit to 9 points with 3 consecutive threes by Jamal, Nikola, and Aaron, if I remember correctly, and then started chipping away points until late in the third quarter when they finally got the lead. They held on that lead for the most of the fourth quarter, but then with several bad plays, they blew it and lost the game by 5 points. Joker scored 41, including 7 threes, possibly reacting to everybody saying that his jump shot is gone forever. Take note of how you should respond to chatter, Jamal. Jamal was actually pretty good until the crunch time when he made a bad layup attempt, 1 turnover as well, possibly due to exhaustion. Christian Braun was excellent in his 5th starter role. Westbrook brought some good energy off the bench, but other than that, it was pretty bleak. Aaron Gordon seems to trust his jumper a lot more than the audience does. There was a lot of wincing on some early shot clock pull-ups. Michael Porter started the season 3 of 16 from the outside, which wouldn't be as bad if there was any other reliable shooting available on the team. He actually stopped shooting at one point, with the biggest moment being him passing a wide open above the break 3 for an Aaron Gordon corner 3. That was weird. Some of his passiveness late in the game actually made sense since Nikola was on fire, but ultimately needed to make 8 threes to keep them in this game, but the slacker only made 7. Peyton Watson looks horrible on offense, just unplayable, but he's ramping up from the injury. Here's hoping he'll be better next week. Okay, that will be enough of an intro for today. I have a great guest waiting in the backstage. He is a lawyer in the Wild West by day and an NBA writer for the Bleacher Report by night. there's no reason for me to do any more introductions, because if you're watching this show, you definitely already follow him on Twitter. It's Andrew D. Bailey. Welcome back to the show, Andy.
Always happy to be here, Miroslav. I love your show, so thank you for having me on.
Oh, my pleasure, Andy. And did you expect to see this kind of start to the season for the Nuggets? Let's say 3 or 4 weeks ago, before the preseason actually started.
Prior to the preseason, I would say absolutely no. I didn't expect them to start 0-2. The Thunder loss shouldn't be that surprising to me or anyone else. Like their roster is pretty loaded, and they gave Denver some trouble last year too. But it was the way that they lost to OKC, and then the way that they opened the game against LA. That's really disappointing if you're a Nuggets fan, though not, again, maybe it shouldn't be surprising. I mean, we've seen a lot of flat nights, at least in terms of effort, from the Nuggets basically ever since they won the title. I was more optimistic about them this season than I think most people were over the course of the offseason, because I thought the loss of KCP was like wildly overblown by most people in the media. Really helpful player, fit really well in Denver, but I was pretty confident that Christian Braun could make up for his impact in production. And I think one of the bright spots, I guess, of an 0-2 start is that I do think Christian Braun's been fine. I was also optimistic that Russell Westbrook, in my mind, I understand all the shortcomings with him and all the reasons it's gone wrong at previous stops, but I just didn't think there was any way that the backup point guard minutes could get worse, and that the non-Jokic minutes could get worse. And through 2 games, they are worse. But it's just 2 games. Teams get off to slow starts and recover. But in the 24-25 Western Conference, I think it's scarier to start 0-2 than it may have been in some other seasons. So kind of a long-winded way of saying, at the very least, it's like a letdown of a start from these first 2 games, even if we've seen performances like this from them quite a few times since they won the title.
It's very rational to say that Christian Braun should be able to compensate for losing KCP. He's a very capable NBA player, a very good defender, an excellent defender, honestly.
Mm-hmm.
The reason I was very low on this move by the Nuggets was because first you lose KCP, and then you lose the guy behind KCP, because now Christian Braun is in the starting lineup, and he's no longer the guy you can rely on the bench. And we put a lot of eggs in our Julian Strother basket, and maybe for good reason. This is the book that still needs to be written. But one thing that I actually underestimated about losing KCP is the fact that not only you're losing a guy who was a reliable 3-point shooter, though on a pretty low volume, you've lost so much geometry of the court by introducing basically 4 non-shooters in your top 9, or 9 real guys, as Calvin Booth calls them. And that's a real issue here. And I honestly didn't see it coming this hard. And this is not something that's written in stone. It could completely turn around in next 5 games. They might win 5 in a row, and we'll all sound foolish about it. But the fact that you have actually the 7 threes by Nikola Jokic feel like a godsend, because he was shooting pretty horrifically in the past year. Do you think in this NBA league we are seeing today, with teams shooting 63 pointers and making like 28 of those, how optimistic can we be about the Nuggets composition of the team with so many non-shooters or not reliable shooters?
Yeah. That's a good question on the back of some good points. I'll first say that I didn't put enough stock into Christian Brown being promoted to the starting lineup and what that would do to the guys behind them. That was really important. And then just the fact that like KCP didn't take a lot of threes, but he obviously commanded attention on the 3-point line. And so your point about geometry, I think, is a really important one too. And that, to answer your question, throughout the first two games, this thought has, and it's kind of colored by the fact that I've watched the Celtics too. The thought has been running through my mind watching the Nuggets, like, I just don't know if you can keep pace anymore with the kind of offensive profile that Denver has. I don't remember off the top of my head, but I think Denver may have been 30th in 3-pointers per game last year, which is, they obviously survived that. They won 57 games. You could say it came back to haunt them eventually, and it probably did in several individual games over the course of the year. But they went 57-25, which is great. But each year, I think the importance of 3-point shooting has crept up a little bit. It's kind of plateaued over the last 4 or 5 years, but based on this really small sample of this preseason and the first week or so of the regular season, it looks like this could be another year where it jumps up a lot. Coming into the season, I think the record for percentage of shots taken in a season as threes was like 39.9. And then in the preseason, it was 44.1 or something like that. If that maintains throughout the league in the regular season, teams take 44% of their shots as threes, and Denver's at 35. That's a problem. And one of the reasons they made up for a lack of volume over the last few years is they were, pretty good efficiency wise. It looks really bad when your best shooter is, you mentioned his numbers at the top. Michael Porter Jr. has not shot well in the first 2 games. So obviously that could change some things, but I think they have to get just better at 3-point shooting. And it's like an easy thing to say. I don't know if there's necessarily somebody out there. The trade market will kind of be fleshed out over the course of the season, and maybe there's somebody that they can go after. But at the same time, it seems like Calvin Booth is very committed to this, we got to make the young guys helpful project. If that turns into big minutes for Julian Strawther and he's an effective guy who shoots, 10 threes per 100 possessions or something and makes him at 39, 40%, he'll be vindicated. But I think there's reasons to be concerned about all the young guys, like even Christian Brown, who I like. And like I said, I think he can adequately replace KCP. His hesitance as a 3-point shooter, I think, could be a problem. His release, I think, impacts that geometry point that you brought up earlier. Like if KCP's in the corner and he gets a shot or a pass to the shooting pocket from Jokic, it's up like right away. Christian Brown, there's kind of like, he dips it down. He's got that long release. It seems like a little thing, but you need guys who are really confident and are really good 3-point shooters to be a contender in today's NBA. And when you have Jokic, it does make everything easier, but I'm not sure the roster is optimized for him right now.
I think that even with the flaws we've mentioned right now, at the top of their game, this roster might be good enough around Joker, but a lot of things would need to click. At this moment, I feel like Aaron Gordon is not playing at his top level. He was probably, nervous about the contract not being extended yet for a pretty long time, and he was probably not pushing him too strongly in the workouts because you don't want to risk an injury at that moment when the things are not very clear. So he's probably ramping up at the moment. Jamal Murray, I have no idea what to tell you about Jamal Murray. Like when Jamal Murray looked so bad in 95% of his minutes since late April, I guess, this year. But then he had some really, really nice moments. Not as many in the preseason, but in these 2 games, he had flashes of good play. Granted, mostly in the first quarter when he is really high on energy, I guess. But do you have any kind of explanation why the Nuggets look like a guest team in their own arena on altitude?
Probably nothing more complex. I think you posted about this on Twitter, and it could be as simple as most guys don't spend their off seasons at altitude, and then they were in Abu Dhabi for a big chunk of the preseason. I would assume they'll get acclimated to it if they're not already. There's also just something that's plagued them for much of the last 18 months. I mentioned it probably 10 times in the power rankings in Bleacher Report when I would do the little blurb on the Nuggets. I'd say something like, something just kind of feels off about this team's energy. I have to cover the whole league, and so I'm flipping around League Pass a lot from night to night and trying to catch a bunch of different games. And I may stumble upon a Hornets game or the Pistons are coming to mind, but I don't think they're the best example, but I'll use them. But I can turn on really bad teams and see them running around on defense like their hair's on fire and driving to the basket and diving for loose balls. There's like this hunger in a lot of other teams in the league that doesn't show up in the Nuggets as often, or at least it hasn't since they won the title. There's a lot of games where they kind of just sort of shuffle out onto the floor when it starts. They don't often lose the starter minutes because it's a really good lineup and it has Jokic. But they do kind of come out flat a lot. And I think maybe that flat attitude carries over to the bench. And by the time it's 4 or 5 minutes into the second quarter, they're down 10 to a team that they should not be losing to. Maybe it feels more pronounced this season because it's the first 2 games of the season. And that what I just described is something that you would probably expect more in like January and February from a team. But it's not that uncommon for the Nuggets. So maybe they are still getting acclimated to Denver, or maybe they just have sort of a cultural ho-hum attitude to some of these regular season games. At least that's how it appears on TV. I'm not a beat reporter who's around the team and around practices as much as some of the other media guys, but as an observer who watches almost all their games, their effort level does not always appear to be there.
Yeah, it definitely seems like a chore to a lot of the veterans on the team. And speaking of that, Nikola Jokic started the season with a triple-double and followed that with a 40-piece last night or yesterday. So a lot of people, including me, worried about his conditioning. He looked kind of slow on defense in the preseason and honestly in some parts of these 2 games as well. But does this prove that just how high his floor is, or did we exaggerate the fitness not being optimal, at least from his side?
I would say both on that question. There is a floor with him that's probably as high as anyone who's ever played in the NBA, frankly. Like he is a metronome of production. You are almost always going to get really good numbers from Jokic for the last 4 or 5 years. It's obviously filling out the rest of your 5-man unit. And again, it's typically been fine when he's with the starters. Things really fall apart when the bench starts shuffling in. I think that's probably the biggest problem. And then the other thing is conditioning, I think, for years has just looked different with Jokic than it does with most NBA players. Even centers, most really good NBA centers, they're very long, very lean. And Jokic is obviously long. He's a 7-footer and he's got a big wingspan. But he's always carried this body that just doesn't look like the typical NBA frame. But for years and years and years, he's won a lot of battles of attrition. I can't remember what year it was, but there was that playoff game. I think this is when a lot of people's eyes opened to it when he played the Blazers and it went to multiple overtimes and he played like 50 plus minutes or something. And he's still, I'll use the word metronome. Yeah. Again, he's not the fastest guy in the league, but 3 or 4 overtimes deep, he's still running up and down the floor. Part of that is maybe conservation of energy on defensive possessions at times, which may be frustrating for some fans. But there are obviously a lot of reasons to be concerned about the Nuggets through 2 games and through through an off season that I maybe didn't analyze correctly. But I think it's safe to say Jokic is probably not one of those concerns.
We'll continue with our impressions from the first 2 games after this break, but I have to tell you guys now about Empire Today. Empire Today is when you need new flooring, you just don't need to look any further. So many people already enjoy Empire Today floors. Just ask them about their great experience. With Empire Today, you get a shop at home convenience, the right product for your needs, quick and professional installation, and a price match guarantee. Empire Today is the best place to get new flooring, so of course they have copycats, but they can't beat them on quality, service, or speed, so they use phrases like lowest price in the business. That's because they offer low quality products that Empire Today simply won't carry. Empire Today won't promise the lowest prices because anyone who does that is putting flooring in your home that they wouldn't put in theirs. Their philosophy is to help you find what you need, not overwhelm you with thousands of choices and substitutes. Their virtual floor designer is a great way to see how new floors will look in any space. And remember, flooring is all Empire Today does. They live and breathe flooring, so you can be confident you're getting honest, upfront advice. They service their own warranties. If an issue does arise, just call Empire. Schedule a free in-home estimate today. All listeners can receive a $350 off discount when they use the promo code DNVR. Restrictions apply. See empiretoday.com/DNVR for details. Okay, Andy, we are back talking about the 2 games to start the season of the Nuggets. And one thing that that worries, you mentioned the starters still look good. Like maybe not great, but the minutes, they just won their minutes so far. We thought that maybe having Russell Westbrook as a guy who is capable every night to give you at the very least something like 12 6 and 6 in 20 minutes off the bench should be enough for the bench to finally get some production. And it was completely opposite. He's great on defense. He's really biting the opponents on defense, but on offense there are so many turnovers, so many missed layups with him. And especially my guy Dario Saric looks completely out of sorts playing next to him so far. I mean, I will always be high on Dario because I knew how great of a player he was in his young years, and he basically became a specialist in the NBA for many years now.
Well,
But
he was good last season too.
Yeah, he was.
I think it's fair to be optimistic about him.
Yeah. Right now, he doesn't look great. I'm not sure that Russell Westbrook is the best possible point guard for him, but we'll see. I've seen a lot of people saying how bad Dario looks right now. Do you have an answer or on how could Dario become a valuable part of this rotation going forward?
Yeah, that's a good question. He does look pretty rough right now. And I think the answer with both him and Westbrook may be that there's just going to be an acclimation period. And I think that's fair for role players on a new team. He's a big guy, but he's not the most athletic big guy, especially with the number of injuries that he's gone through over the course of his career. And so going up against some more explosive backup bigs could be difficult for him. I'm going to reserve judgment on the Westbrook Saric partnership because again, I may very well have just whiffed on the Nuggets off season. I'm willing to accept that's a possibility. But one of the reasons I was optimistic is I really liked Saric's shooting with Westbrook. Like, I thought Westbrook against backup point guards is going to be able to get to the paint a decent amount. Saric is going to be spaced out, and maybe he'll kick it out to him, and he'll be able to hit some threes. I feel like they've maybe had Saric operating in the post a little too much. Maybe that's an answer to your question. I don't think he's. Maybe they're just trying to like recreate the Jokic minutes to the best that they can when he's not on the floor, thinking that Sarge can be kind of like a high post, low post playmaking hub. But he has looked kind of out of place down there, and maybe the way the bench should be playing is 5 out. Have Saric use his size defensively and maybe occasionally in the post, but offensively maybe he should be more outside the 3-point line. That's a tricky one. I feel like it's maybe been bad enough to even roll the dice on Zeke for a few minutes in the next few games just to see what it looks like. But I'm not quite ready to give up on Saric because, like I said, I thought he was really effective for the Warriors last season, and that's a read and react style offense. And I thought he really helped them, and I figured he'd help Denver for a lot of the same reasons. So he could have a big shooting night in the next 2 or 3, and we all feel differently. But it's certainly not the not the perfect puzzle piece fit that I kind of expected it to be in the offseason. Same with Russ. I mean, obviously that just has not looked anywhere near as good as I thought it would. His decision-making on offense has been really bad. I love his effort on defense, but it's almost like he gets into these little psychological battles with his matchups 5 or 6 times over the course of the game. You can almost see it click in his brain, like, I have to go score on this guy now. And that leads to some terrible turnaround mid-range 2 that's not even close, or some hopeless, flying drive to the basket that ends in a missed layup or a turnover. I'm not even sure I'm on your question at this point, but now that I'm rambling, when he played with Jokic yesterday in the Clippers game, that was the first moment where I was like, I can kind of see it now with Westbrook, and maybe everybody just looks better with Jokic, but there was a few minutes in the second half where he was just sort of this chaos agent out there with Jokic. And maybe the answer to all this is Malone does something radical and makes Jokic the first guy to come off the floor. And he plays some minutes with the bench. He becomes the stagger guy instead of Jamal Murray. I feel like we have a year and a half of evidence that says that's not the best starter to play with the bench in Murray. So they've got to try some different stuff to make that second unit work, because it's been bad through 2 games, but it's been bad for like 2 or 3 years now. And at a certain point, you might have to do something dramatic.
Yeah, the 4 real guys, as Calvin Booth called them, off the bench are a point guard in Russ, a shooting guard in Strutter, small forward in Peyton Watson, and Dario Saric, who is like a tweener 4/5. So if you stagger Jamal with them, you're not only experiencing the bad memories of Jamal stagger with the bench, but you're also lowering the height, the total length, cumulative length of that 5. So this is why Michael Porter just seems like a perfect idea of a stagger.
I like him there too.
A very, very tall guy to play next to Saric. I'm not sure about the defensive prowess of that duo under the rim, but Peyton Watson is really good on defense. Julian Strutter looks a lot better. Looked a lot better on defense in the second game compared to the first game, when he was basically a target on defense. But I've been talking about Jokic stagger for at least 2 years now, and the only reason why it's not a solve It's because at some point he still needs to get out, and I'm not 100% sure that even 4 starters without him are gonna fare that
Yeah.
great in those in those non-Jokic minutes. It's a really big mystery to me. Just one point I wanted to make about Šarić and Westbrook. The problem with Šarić is he needs the ball in his hands a bit because he's a really good passer, really good connector, and he's just not crossing the half-court line in time because
Yeah.
Russell is already jammed next to the backboard, and that might be a
I
problem.
think that's true, and I think there's value in Westbrook like picking up the pace a little bit, because one of the things that's been relatively frustrating about the Nuggets is how slow they've played for the last couple of years. But he's ramped it up to the point that what you just described is happening. Like he's under the basket with 3 or 4 opponents while all his teammates are behind him. And maybe it'll just take some time for the rest of the Nuggets to realize, oh, when Russ is on the floor, we better be running the floor with him, and things will look better. But I'll tell you, there have been several decisions from Russ in the first couple games where I'm just like, whoa, I don't know what you were seeing there, but it's not working.
That's basically why he works next to Jokic really well, because he'll miss those layups, but Joker is there for the offensive rebound. It's basically a Kobe assist by Russell Westbrook. It's the same thing Kobe did.
There's that, and there's also the fact that the decision maker when Jokic is on the floor is Jokic. Yeah. And so Russ is now acting on like instinct and cutting to the basket and being kind of a menace on defense. I mean, it would be nice if Jokic could just play 48 minutes a game for the Nuggets, but that's probably not sustainable. And I just feel like I got to drop this caveat every 10 minutes in this episode. It's only 2 games. Like things could look dramatically different in a week. But to start 0-2 with both games being at home in a West that's going to be like ridiculously competitive this year, I do think it's fair for some fans to be like, what's going on here? And to be a little nervous. I don't hold that against them at all.
Okay, we have a couple of pieces of news to catch up on the other side. So it's gonna be. I promise it's gonna still be interesting. So don't go anywhere. Okay, we are back, and Andy. Early last week, Aaron Gordon finally got extended. Thanks to him and his agent, he opted in his player option for the 2025-26 season, which means the Nuggets will probably stay under the second apron this and next season. I have the Nuggets payroll lined up here, and you can see that, of course, Nikola is now earning above $50 million per year. Jamal Murray, starting next season, is going to be above $50 million as well. Michael Porter will be at 38. So I'm looking at next season. This season, we know what the Nuggets are regarding the salary cap. I don't think they're going to cross over the second apron unless an amazing player becomes available at very cheap price, so they could try to do something there. Next season, Aaron Gordon is still on $22.8 million, which means that even with Jamal's pay hike of $14 million, the Nuggets are still going to stay under the second apron with 4 of their guys on big contracts. Do you believe that this and next season might be the best chance for the Nuggets of this era to go all the way to the championship?
I think the answer to that question has to be yes. I think as long as you have Jokic in his prime, I think you have a chance. But he's now, is he 29?
Yeah, he's going to be 30 soon.
Okay. I think we're now entering the point where we might see marginal decreases successive season. And so there's a chance that the window shuts just a tiny bit each year from here on out. Now, I will say Jokic has a one of his most important attributes is not going anywhere, and that's his size. And he does have a game that I think is going to age better than players who are heavily reliant on athleticism. So maybe the window stays open a little bit longer. But he's into his prime now, and he's going to age each year. And then also the introduction of this new collective bargaining agreement that just makes team building so much more complicated and costly and difficult is going to make it harder to keep championship cores together for more than like 2 or 3 years. So I think Denver's actually in pretty good shape, I think, in terms of the top of their roster, because they got those 4 guys locked in. But it's just harder now with that new CBA to keep a core together. So the fact that they have it for the next couple of years is great. That was one of the reasons I wasn't as concerned about the KCP loss as some other people were, because at some point there was going to have to be some kind of a cap or a CBA casualty. And if you had to pick one of those 5 guys, KCP is probably the right decision. Now, ultimately being right depends a lot on the guys that Booth has drafted. So if he doesn't have hits on, I feel relatively comfortable saying he's got a hit in Brown, but he's probably going to need 1 or 2 more for this to really be vindicated. So long-winded way of saying, yeah, I think if they don't do it this year or next, it's going to get trickier. And maybe I should have talked as much about Murray and his health as I did about Jokic, because in a lot of ways he almost looks like the older player than Jokic a lot of nights, and he's got a pretty robust injury history, and so maybe he starts to slow down. And obviously, when they won the title, that postseason from Murray was spectacular. I mean, he was out of his mind for that playoff run. So if they don't have that Jamal Murray, that alone makes it difficult for the Nuggets to contend. So they are in the prime window right now, and it's important for them to realize that. I'm sure they do, and maybe they're just attacking it differently than we're used to. We're so used to superstars putting pressure on their front offices, and it's all win now moves, all veterans, forget the future. I actually think I think Booth and the front office to a certain degree are to be commended for at least being creative and thinking beyond the next couple of years, but there's risk for sure.
As I mentioned, I was hard on Booth for letting KCP go. And, fans thought that the Cronkies were cheap, didn't want to pay to go that deep into the luxury tax. I think that the fact that now they have Aaron Gordon for 5 years and Jamal Murray for 5 years and Nikola Jokic for 4 years and Michael Porter for 3 more years, that means that they are ready to pay,
for sure,
penalties going forward. And it is something that I've heard a couple of months ago, that it wasn't the Cronkies that were cheap. It was the Booth's way of handling things. He wants to wheel and deal, because if he went straight into the second apron, he couldn't do that, because he would be basically, sentenced to a team he already has and just try to fill it in with the minimum contracts around those guys. But now that he's staying under the second apron, and I'm going to say something controversial here, not a lot of people are going to like to hear it. I actually think that he thinks that probably 2 out of 4 big salary guys on the Nuggets are tradable, or maybe not tradable, maybe that's not the right word, but can be got away from if needed. And I don't think it's Aaron Gordon, because he just got a trade kicker next to his contract. His contract is going to be more valuable in case he's traded away. So, and obviously don't think Nikola Jokic is one chip. That's I mean, maybe if Oklahoma offers 20 first rounders, I don't know. But all kidding aside, I think that the way Calvin Booth operates means that both Michael Porter and Jamal Murray should think about them not being irreplaceable on this team. Do you agree with that?
Well, I can see why you preface that as this could be controversial. I think Jamal Murray is understandably, and maybe fans are frustrated with him at this point, but when they won the title, it was like this is the next iteration of Shaq and Kobe, Murray and Jokic, and I think when those two guys are right, and you have the right version of Jokic 98% of the time. So really, the question is when Jamal Murray is right. That's a duo that fits together so perfectly, and is able to read each other so perfectly that I would be really hesitant to break those two up if I was the front office. And I get that there's a lot of frustrating stretches with Murray, particularly at the start of most seasons. It seems like it takes him a while to ramp up. But the ceiling that those two have shown when they're together is championship level. And I think after Jokic, the second biggest reason they won the title was Jamal Murray.
Absolutely.
So that one is harder for me to wrap my head around. Like I don't think. I guess if the question is he completely off limits, totally untradeable? Maybe the answer to that is no, depending on what's on the other side. I think it would just take a monumental, like mind-blowing type of an offer for that to make sense to me. Now, I think I like Michael Porter Jr. a lot. I got a chance to do a profile on him a couple years ago, and so I got to talk to him and his family, and that was really cool. And so maybe there's some bias coloring my analysis on him. I really want him to be good, and I think he's really important for this particular roster because it's like we've said a bunch of times now, there's so little reliable shooting. And so if you trade him, you better be getting at least one really reliable shooter back. But having said that, I think he's probably the most obvious trade chip on the roster. I think a lot of people would say Zeke Naji to that, but I just don't know like who in the NBA wants Zeke Naji. Yeah. I think Peyton Watson is kind of an interesting trade chip at this point, even though you said, and I think you're right, he hasn't looked good offensively in these two games, and he really hasn't had a lot of great, offensive stretches in his career, but he's really long. He's a great athlete. He has a ton of defensive potential. And so maybe if he's attached to one of the bigger contracts, he becomes a good anchor for a deal. But one trade that I've written about, and I've seen, some version of the framework making the rounds on Twitter the last couple of days. I still don't hate the like Michael Porter Jr. for Bogdanovich and stuff from Atlanta. And Bogdanovich is older than people realize. Bogdanovich, I think he's like 32.
Yeah.
But he's another guy who has, if you've watched much Serbian national team basketball, he's another guy who has like an innate connection with Jokic. It's kind of like Murray. And so I feel like if he is suddenly your lead playmaker off the bench, that second unit looks way different. And because of the difference in contract size, Atlanta's going to have to send another role player along with him. And so the team probably gets a little deeper if you make a trade like that too. And I think Michael Porter Jr. makes some sense on the Hawks. Like
he's a good friend with Trae Young.
Yeah, I think they played AAU ball together maybe at some point. And they're building this, I think, a pretty cool roster for Trae Young with a bunch of lengthy, switchable 3-4 type guys like Jalen Johnson, Reese Shea, Hunter for now, I'm not as high on him as those first two guys, but he kind of fits that philosophical mold. And then MPJ as part of that. I think that's a really interesting team and fit for him. I'm going to be a politician and say I don't really know what the right answer is, like if they should make a trade like that or not. But I can see the value in that one for both teams.
Bogdan Bogdanovic is a foxhole guy for sure. He is a guy, especially
Yeah.
when we talk about Serbian national team. He is the soul of that team. Absolutely isn't the best player on that team when Nikola Jokic is playing there, but he is a guy that is supremely important for the health of that team. And it wasn't a big surprise that Serbian team actually failed back in 2019 at the 2022 at the basket without Bogdan Bogdanovic, even though they had most of the other stars on that team. But I digress. Too far away. I agree. Bogdan Bogdanovic would probably be great on the Nuggets. I'm not sure for how many years, as you mentioned. He is getting a bit long on the tooth, but yeah, he's definitely one of the guys I would trust.
Yeah, and I think he's another guy. Who, I think he's going to at least be good until he's 35, 36. He's another guy whose game I don't think is going to be terribly impacted by like a slight decrease in athleticism. A lot of what makes him good is shooting and passing and just sort of craft. And maybe it's a Serbian thing, the way that you guys are raising basketball players over there. He's just a really solid feel for the game basketball player, and I think he'll be good for a few more years.
Okay, one more detail I wanted to talk to you about before I let you go. You do the Lord's work every year by showing who everybody thinks the best player in the world is, and you have this very good updated tweet, and this one was from I believe 2 or 3 days ago, with 11 outlets reporting he is the top 100 NBA players for 2024-2025 according to the average of their ranks from all over the internet. And Nikola Jokic's average rank is 1.00, which means all 11 outlets think that Nikola Jokic is the number one player in the league right now. Now, this wasn't the case a year ago when they actually won the championship. I think he was very close to that, something like 1.15 or something like that. How do you explain the increased confidence of everybody in Nikola that he's going to be the best NBA player this upcoming season too?
How do I explain the increase? Is that what you said?
Yeah, because it actually looks more confident now than a year ago.
Yeah. I was scrolling through trying to see if I had the results from last year, and I do, but I didn't have the actual averages on there for some reason. The year ago version of me was dumb. But I do think it's I do think it's been a while since there's been a consensus. I do think it's ridiculous that it's taken this long to get to this consensus with Jokic. I felt like it was abundantly clear. I may have been a little premature with it. Honestly, I was probably ready to go there after the first MVP because it was such just an absurd statistical season, and he's just backed it up every year since then. Maybe it's people losing some trust in Giannis over the last couple of years that's contributed to him being unanimous now. Obviously, there's a slide with LeBron, although he hasn't really been in the mix for the last 4 or 5 years anyway. There's certainly a lack of trust with Embiid right now. He played 30-some games last year. He had the 2 injuries in the playoffs, and then he's coming off that comment where he says he's never going to play back-to-backs again. And so a lot of people, a lot of those outlets had Embiid like 5 or 6 this time around, which was interesting. I don't know. I mean, from what I saw of the outlets I've looked at, nobody really mentioned this explicitly, but maybe they thought about it when they were making their rankings. How good Jokic looked in the Olympics maybe had something to do with it. The fact that he, with all due respect to his Serbian teammates, they were really outgunned in that matchup with Team USA, and they took him to the brink. in a knockout round game. I mean, that was a huge deal, and that had a lot to do with Jokic. So maybe it's this big stew of factors have finally all come together, and people are willing to give him this unanimous selection. But with how much talent is in the league right now, like if Denver flames out in the second round again and SGA gets to the finals or something like that, like there's probably going to be some outlet that has SGA at number one. Like there are some, or Luka. I mean, I haven't even mentioned Luka. Like if Dallas goes to the finals again and he has another crazy season, like there are going to be guys who are coming for that throne really quickly. But I do think it's good that finally Jokic is being acknowledged as the undisputed, for the most part, best player in the world. Again, it's probably a little bit late, but I guess I'll say better late than never.
Luka definitely has the case to be, in my mind, tied with Nikola as the best player alive. He just doesn't have the hardware to show for yet. But who knows what the new season is gonna bring us. To your point about the Olympics, I think that I've never seen the Olympics being this influential on NBA audience or NBA analysts as it was this year. And it's probably because all of the US stars were there and they almost got kicked out in the semifinals. So I agree with it. And by the way, everybody's going to forget about it for the next 4 years until the next Olympics come, because the Americans are still going to send only like 4 All-Stars to the FIBA World Cup and not win a medal. Don't win a medal again.
Well, they're definitely going to do that, but I like the days of them being a foregone conclusion for gold at the Olympics are over too. Yeah. Like if you look at the up and coming talent in the NBA right now, there are so many non-Americans, and there's already questions about who's going to be on the roster for Team USA in 4 years. I'll just talk about France for a second. Like they were in the gold medal game, and they got Victor Wembanyama coming up. They got Risache. I think Serbia will still be good. Jokic I think he'll probably go one more round in the Olympics. You would probably know that better than me. But there's going to be some stiff competition from here on out. And I think, I don't think it's controversial to say that the other countries just do the international circuits better than Team USA does. And I think it's cool that they're now being so thoroughly challenged. It makes international basketball so much more fun to watch those really, high level competitive games where this, superpower that hasn't really been toppled many times in the last 30 years is at risk pretty much every time going forward. At least that's what it looks like to me.
Okay, Andy, thank you so much for stopping by. What do you have cooking for us at Bleacher Report?
Not a ton right now. We just did the top 50 for Shaq, Chuck, and Kenny. That was a big project that all the words you saw written for that thing was me. So that was fun. And then power rankings will get cooking here next week. That'll keep me busy every single week. And I'm just excited to have some new information and new games to finally look at. So it'll be fun to really dive into this season.
Thank you so much for coming by, and we'll talk soon.
Thanks as always for having me.
Okay, let's take one more short break, and after that, let's get crazy. Don't go anywhere. Okay, we are back. Getting, let me take this away. Getting random with Andy. Andy Juett is with us for a brand new, never seen before segment. And I have no idea what this is going to be, but let me just hand my hosting baton to him. Andy, welcome. Oh, you're muted by me.
Start with this word right here because that's what we're in the middle of, folks. And also, before we get into the actual chaos of the day that is the Denver Nuggets and its current state of affairs, I thought it'd be fun. You guys, you have us on all the time, especially in the summers, to quiz us about statistics that some are reasonable and some are very obscure and ridiculous. So I thought I would pick a couple items from these last two basketball games, particularly the game yesterday against the Los Angeles Clippers, where our hero and savior Nikola Jokic magically drained 7 threes and almost won the game for us. Are you down for a little quiz today, Miro?
Absolutely. Just hit me.
Okay, so Nikola Jokic, he had 7 3-pointers in the game yesterday, okay? And in the history of the NBA, my question to you is, how many centers have had a game with more than 7 3-pointers?
So at least 8, right?
That is incorrect. It is less than that. Oh, you mean 8 3-pointers or more?
Yeah, at least.
Yes.
8.
Oh, well, now I've really blown it. Because I'm sure you were thinking at least 2 dozen. No, there's, yes, 8 or more 3-pointers is the question. Yes, to clarify. You're so gracious at doing this, and I've blown it in my swap as hosting duty.
Okay, so Karl Anthony Towns is the greatest big man shooter of all time, so he must be on the list.
He is number 1. He had one game where he scored 10 3-pointers.
Very good.
Do you have any ideas about number 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6? And I'll give you a hint. There is only one of these is before 2000. And in the top 25 games of centers shooting threes, there's only one that is pre-2000, and it's in the 90s. So to go back to the question, there's one player from the 90s in the top 6, 8 or more 3-pointers. You got Karl Towns. Do you know who is number 2, 3, 4, 5, or 6 at the center position for 3-pointers in a single game, Miro?
Yeah, I wanna say, what's the Channing that played with LeBron back in the day? Channing Frye. Is he on the list?
Miro, Channing Frye is on a list, but only at 7 or less, because he made 7 in one game. So he is rounding out the top 25 centers that have made 7 or more in one game. But 8 or more gets real wild, because I didn't know the answers to some of these.
I have no idea who the guy from the 90s is. Like, I know that the like Manute Ball could hit a 3-pointer here and there, and like, I don't know if Sean Bradley ever hit a 3-pointer. 8 is a lot.
I think he's made a couple, but it's not Sean Bradley.
Yeah, absolutely.
I'm just gonna save the suspense since we don't have time nor graphics to support this quiz, but I thought it was interesting. Maybe in the future, you and I'll have a powwow. We'll have wonderful graphics for the viewing public. But for those listening and watching at home, number 2 is America's sweetheart, Aaron Baines. He had a 9 3-point game in 2020 when he played for the Suns, and none other than that. His next closest game was 4, I believe. Okay.
Yeah. Isn't he Australian?
Yes, he's not American at all. It was a joke. Yes, he's from where the toilet flushes the other way.
It's true.
Now, the other couple are a little more obvious. There are 4 that had 8, the 3, 4, 5, 6 slot, and one is arguably not a center. So we'll throw that out in a second.
So it's Dirk Nowitzki?
The Dirk played 200 and something games as a center technically, so they counted that. He had 8, so he's one of the 6 in 2004.
Yeah, that makes sense. By the way, imagine how many threes Dirk would make if he played in 2024, like prime Dirk. He would probably
with the new rules, he'd be even more of a beast. Yeah.
I always think about Peja Stojakovic as well. He would probably average 30 points per game in this era. But
Peja would be like Bogdanovic on steroids.
Yeah. So who's the guy from the 90s?
The guy from the 90s is none other than the big smooth himself, Sam Perkins, from the Seattle Supersonics. And
that actually makes sense. Yeah,
a nice January game in 1997.
Yeah, it was probably too cold, so he had to shoot threes to warm his hands, I'm guessing. Yeah, Sam Perkins was a good shooter. Yeah,
he was a good shooter. He was a good shooter. I'm surprised he had 8, to be honest. Like, I don't.
That's a lot.
That's a lot. And it also just goes to show you all these statistics post 2000. You know, people bitch online about the 3-point shot ruining or at least taking over the game to a large extent, and it is very evident from the center statistics, all-time 3-pointers made in a game, because I looked through it. There are 2 more players who have actually had 7 or more multiple times, and I'll give you the totals after that. There's 2 you've missed. I'll give you a hint. In Miro style, one was born in 1988 in Los Angeles, California. And a much easier clue, since the show has to end sometime in the next 15 minutes. He is the number 21 all-time in points for the Milwaukee Bucks.
Jesus, why am I blanking here?
It'll be very obvious when you say it. That's my hint.
With the Milwaukee Bucks
center, Milwaukee Bucks. We've already.
Oh, it's Brook Lopez.
Brook Lopez.
Who, by the way, didn't shoot threes for like his first 10 seasons
at all. Because the culture of the game was, why would a center ever shoot ever? For 60 years.
Yeah. Brook
okay.
Lopez. Yeah.
George Mikan would have taken 0 threes to really dig deep. Okay, so Brook Lopez had 7 or more threes 5 times with a high of 8. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's one more who's had 7 or more 3 times. And he is, I didn't pick a clue for him, but I'll just say Indiana Pacers. Post 2000, Indiana Pacers center. So it's not Rick Smits.
It's not Rick Smits, yeah. Rick Smits has a perfect name for the name mashup game.
Yes. Oh, yes.
It's not Roy Hibbert.
It's not Roy Hibbert. I can't think of any other terrible centers for the Pacers to throw out, but I'm just going to give it to you, okay?
Yeah, give it to me.
The answer is Mr. Miles Turner. Miles Turner had 7 or more 3 times, and he had 8. But some other names to round out centers who have had 7 are some of the usual suspects. By the way, Karl Towns had 7 or more 5 times. Okay. But then there's also Naz Reid had a couple. This is my big question. Who is the only center who has had 7 or more threes in a game that is featured in a hit by rapper Sheck Wes?
Now you're just making a fool of me, because like it's like when I have a person born in the 2000s and I ask him about Jack Lemmon, you know.
Yes, that's right. That's right.
The way
You say the answer is Karl Malden. No, it's not that. The answer is, of course, the wonderful Mo Bamba.
Mo Bamba.
If you've never seen the
7 threes.
Yes, he had 7 threes on 2022 game in January. That's when things get boring and people jack things up. A lot of these are in weird times this season.
Yeah.
So if you've never seen the music video for Mo Bamba by Sheck Wes. I highly recommend it. It's fantastic. He's in a rascal scooter the whole time with a broken leg, throwing money everywhere, and it's all in black and white. So go ahead and YouTube that after the show, please.
Hey,
Not during the show. We have tons more content coming.
If we have Move Like Jagger, we can have Move Like Mo Bamba. So why not? Why not?
All right. Well, now I've got one more little bit. I've got two more quiz questions. One is about 3-pointers and one is about the Nuggets this year. Okay. The 3-pointer question, we're back to centers shooting 3-pointers.
Okay.
Can you name the top 5 centers for 3-pointers made all time? And the answers are somewhat repeated, is my hint. So you can start there.
Yeah, of course. So Karl Towns, like that sounds so much more mature than Karl Anthony Towns. Karl Towns, definitely.
Yes, he's number 1. He has 978 3-pointers all time as a center. He also has the highest completion or 3-point percentage of all centers at 39.8, which for all of us that dog Karl Towns is pretty goddamn good.
It is good. It is good.
It's really impressive.
Yeah, it looks cowardly, but it's really impressive.
Yeah, he looks.
Like so Dirk
time.
must be there, right? Dirk probably had enough.
No, Dirk's 200 games are not included, so he didn't match the number 5 person in the 200 games he played center.
Okay.
So, but there is one more repeat from the previous answers.
Just one more.
Just one. That's part of why I'm sharing, because I found this to be fascinating.
That's interesting. So,
and the repeat is number 2.
So let's go with Brook Lopez then.
You nailed it, Miro.
Yeah.
Brook Lopez of Panorama City, Los Angeles, California. He is number 2 with 938 all-time 3-pointers made. So he and Towns are real close. Towns will blow him away by the time it's over because Lopez is 36 or something. So, but then the next one, number 3, I'll give you a hint. Okay.
Okay.
He is a European-born player.
Who played enough games?
Number 3, all-time centers made threes. History of the NBA.
Sabonis didn't play enough seasons for such.
No, but just for fun, I did look up how many threes Sabonis had lifetime. Because he gets compared to Jokic all the time. Yeah. And he had 136 total.
Yeah. You know what? Sabonis actually had a very impressive season of like 2.2 assists per game. Like this is why we compare him to
no, absolutely. He's an incredible player, of course. I'm just saying he
2.2, absolutely. Like how can you beat that?
I'm just saying that 3 part of the game was not developed.
I just hate the Sabonises, so I'm sorry.
Fair.
I'm sorry about this.
Domantas Sabonis had an incredible dunk last night, I will say.
Good on him. Good on him. So impressive. Okay, so I have 3 more guys to guess that
3 more guys to guess.
The previous list.
You got Towns and Lopez, all-time centers, 3-pointers made.
And a European
next 3
guy. So is it? Oh Jesus!
I'll give you a hint.
Enough.
I'll give you a hint. I gave you European-born as 3. He also is a multiple-time All-Star, but has not played as well the last couple of years, or has not been as obvious an All-Star at least. And you're going to be – I was surprised, but I didn't think he had the volume. But apparently earlier in his career he did. Okay, I'm just going to give it to you for this.
Give it to me. Give it to me.
The answer is Nikola Vucevic.
Oh, yeah, that actually makes a lot of sense. Oh,
yeah,
Jesus.
I didn't think he'd be 3rd all time, but 776 threes. And then number 4 is recent NBA champion Al Horford.
Okay,
I'm just blowing the rest of the list.
Sense. Yeah.
Okay, he had 771. And then number 5 all time made 3-pointers for a center is our very own Nikola Jokic, 684 threes
Of course.
in a paradigm where he goes streaks we're shooting, but it's really like his 5th, 6th, or 7th offensive weapon. He's 5th all time. So I thought that was interesting. Jokic 5th all time in makes for centers.
Yeah, well, Jokic has like 800 games played already in this 3-point era, so that makes sense. Yeah, Nikola is not a high octane three-point shooter, but it makes sense that he's there. I'm actually glad that he's there together with his friend Nikola Vucevic.
I am too.
Who is a swell fellow.
The Europeans are taking over the record books. Okay, so now my last question is just like a segue into our discussion about the first 2 Nuggets games, which I attended and watched closely. Nikola Jokic, of course, leads the team in the first 2 games total in points, assists, rebounds, and steals. Who leads the team in blocks?
Is it Christian Brown?
It is Christian Brown. Miro,
I honestly thought it would be either him or Russell Westbrook.
I think Westbrook is maybe tied or has 1 less, but Christian Brown has the most.
Yeah.
So I just thought that was interesting also. I expect the first 4 stats, I guess. It'd be nice if once in our lives there was someone who was also good at stealing the ball. KCP did a lot of that, I guess. But we're pretty much, what I'm getting to, reliant on Jokic, maybe more than we ever have been. And I am concerned. I shared more optimism at my last appearance last week. I am starting to get a little worried. Not that the team doesn't have tons of talent, because it does. There's Jamal and all those guys are very talented. I'm not sure. It's a long season, so no alarm bells to be pulled, no fire alarm. But like, Russ is 1 of 9 from 3. Now that's standard Russ, so he'll have some game where he makes 4 out of 4 for no reason. But Watson is 0 for 5. Jokic has to make 7 threes for us to have a chance in a game where he misses a rare free throw at the end of the game. Are you concerned at all? Are you more concerned, less concerned? I didn't listen to as much of the first part of the podcast with Andy Bailey, but what's your vibe here, man? I'm a little concerned about spacing. I'm a little concerned about Russ. And if MPJ trade talks just marinate for the next 60 days, I think that will be very bad for the team. I feel like this is a largely vibes problem that we can talk about, but I'm starting to get a little more worried.
Here's the thing, like the worry I have is in 3 numbers, and those numbers are 4, 3, and 2, and those 3 numbers add up to 9 real guys, according to Calvin Booth, and 9 guys that are actually playing minutes for the Nuggets. So there's 4 top 4, core 4, plus 3 youngsters, plus 2 new guys that still need to adapt to playing. That's a lot of variance. That is a lot of variance. And yeah, I do expect a pretty rocky month and a half for the Nuggets. I wouldn't be surprised at all if they're like 500 by the game 24 or anything like that. I wouldn't be too surprised by that. I do think they can become better as the season goes on, but yeah, it's tough. It's not the kind of vibe I was hoping for. The other thing I want to say is I'm afraid that we might get the 4th MVP season for Joker because he gets no help. So I'm really hoping that does not happen this season.
Yes, that makes sense. Like, it feels like I just don't want to I really don't want to feel like it's the Facu season. But the thing to me is and I sometimes am guilty of being a little too the antithesis of the stat guy, meaning the vibes, the joy on the team, like those things to me matter as much or more as stats and propensity to work out the math of things on a basketball court in the modern NBA. But I do think that, I don't know, I love Michael Malone, by the way, and always have. And I don't know if it's his deal or not, but I feel like if you look at JJ Redick, right? He just interjected himself into the LeBronosphere. And I'm not saying he's the answer, and maybe they will be a play-in game team, or maybe they'll win the championship, or maybe they won't even make the playoffs. But I will say that I'm just using it as an example, that in those 3 games, and I've watched them, they look like they're having a blast, and the ball is popping, and it's fundamental basketball, and there's trust, and there's all the glue things that I am not seeing a whole lot from the Nuggets right now. So we came into the season, MPJ was looking amazing and beefed up physically. He's sort of had an okay start. I'm not that worried about him, and I am one who does not think we should trade him at all. Still. But he didn't play great. He's okay. I mean, he was fine. He was not even close to the worst defender. But, you know, the Strothers of the world came in and had some nice streaky minutes and some bad minutes. Same with Peyton Watson. I'm just concerned, like, I don't feel like Russ – I'm a little worried Russ will not be the stabilizing force that Uncle Jeff was. I'm a little concerned that if you go 1 through 8, that we have the answer after 5. That is a bummer. So I'm with you. I think the first month and a half, 2 months, 500, 550 percentage basketball, whatever it is. I am also concerned, though, like last week I asked the question, what happens if Russ doesn't work, right? And his statistics from the first 2 games would absolutely play out that it is not working. Now, it's 2 games. Who cares? 80 more games to go. But if this goes on for another 15, 20 games, it's just something to watch, because it is my position that we do not have a backup plan. And from a strategy standpoint and a front office standpoint, I like Calvin Booth. I liked I loved Tim Connolly, truthfully, and still do. But this is not a situation where I think we're even if we are aware that we've got a problem, why didn't we pick up Lonnie Walker? If we are aware that we've got a problem, why didn't we go after Markelle Fultz or some of these other guys? This gaping hole of like, oh, we'll be fine if Strother's as good as Christian Brown was on the bench. We'll be fine if P-Watt takes the next step. Well, those are some pretty big ifs. Like, their effort is always going to be there. Like, Strother looks bulked up, and I think his peaks and valleys will level out. Peyton Watson had a couple plays where he almost injured himself. He played so hard in the second game. The effort is there. Does that guy and do these other guys have the next step of development? And will they have the patience to give them that rope to hang themselves with? And if not, why are we not playing Vlatko, Zeke, like some of these players that have experience and have shown the propensity to play joyful basketball with the ball popping? Like, we all have problems with Zeke. We all have, we'd like to see Vlatko live up to it, and he's certainly had his share of injuries. But there have been streaks of 10 games, 5 games, 15 games in the last 4 years where both of those guys have shown complete ability to contribute and have meaningful minutes. I'm just like, I feel like we are so uncertain with what we have that I am starting to get a little concerned just based on what I'm seeing from an energy level, let alone statistics or any of those things.
You've touched on the two biggest concerns for the season. One is number 3. I mentioned already 3 youngsters. You are hoping all 3 of them to hit, or at least 2 of them to hit really hard this season in order for the season to be successful. And the other problem is the leading ball handler. God forbid we lose Jamal or Russell Westbrook for a month this season. I have no idea what's the plan in that situation.
We're just going to play Trey Alexander, who is, by the way, shown flashes of greatness. It's just we're putting. It feels like
that
to be fair to Calvin Booth, it would have helped if some of these guys had 20 games last year and not just 2 minutes at the end of the game.
Yeah. Trey Alexander seems to me like a Marcus Howard kind of solution. So no disrespect to Trey Alexander, he might be an awesome player. But if you are looking at your two-way guys as a title contender, you're not in the right path. Okay, that's all the time we had for today. But before we leave, Andy, you have a pretty cool event you'll be hosting in a couple of hours in Denver. Please tell me about it.
Once I find a spotlight so that we can light the stage properly, there will be a wonderful event from 6 to 8 today at Tetra Lounge. We do it the last Sunday of every month. If you've listened to this podcast and seen me annoyingly promote Laugh Your Hash Off, this month is the time to come. It's an outside show. It's going to be 60 degrees, no rain. There's a bunch of people huddled in the back. There's couches and chairs. It's very vibey and cool. Frank Castillo, who is the winner of Comedy Central Roast Battle, is our headliner tonight. Frank is a very funny dude. He also happens to be an absolute pro in terms of smoking hash. So if you want to witness that and see a guy do about 10 dabs and then kill on stage for 30 minutes, come on out because we also have other great comics. Georgia Comstock, hilarious comic from Denver. She's so funny. You will love her. And Nick Dean, another one of my Denver favorites. He's doing stand-up. I produce the show every month with my friend Billy Wayne Davis, who is hosting tonight. Sometimes he does time, sometimes he hosts. So I'll be hosting at some point too, probably. But there is a really great show tonight, 6 to 8, Tetra Lounge. It's after the Frost Hash Brunch that's going on right now. So if you have ins at Tetra, head over now. My friend Bob has a pancake bar from noon to 5. So you're going to want to go in and grab some pancakes. And then if you come to our show, the sugarcane juice man will be there. You can get fresh sugarcane juice. It's going to be a hell of a time, Miro. Thanks for having me and allowing me to plug it.
Oh, okay. Thank you. And let's let people watch the Broncos game that's going to start in a minute. This is all I've prepared for you, my dear listener. And please, with the cherry on top, take the word prepared very loosely. Be well, be safe, be kind to everybody. Call your mom. And until next week, Jay Huff.